YouTube, it's Charlie from Reader Turned Writer, and today I am sharing my May 2021 wrap-up. I read 16 books in the month of May, and it was a fun reading month, so I'll get right into the books. And if you stick around till the end, then I will tell you my top 3 favorite books from the month. The first book that I read was Because of Winn, Dixie by Kate DiCamillo, and this is my main reread of the month. I wanted to reread a book that had animals in it for kind of a spring type theme. And I've been wanting to reread Because of Winn, Dixie because I haven't read it since I was a kid, and I loved it rereading it. And in fact, I actually liked it so much, and while I was reading it, I was like, I bet my kids would really like this. So then after I finished rereading it on my own, I actually read it aloud to my kids, and they really liked it, especially my 5-year-old Parker. And if you have watched any of my videos in the past, you might know that Parker is, not that she loves books, but she is less interested in chapter books at the moment, and it was really fun to find a book that she was really interested in. And so we read through it really fast because it's a short book with not too many words on the page, a really easy reading level. I actually think my 6-year-old could read it on her own. But it was fun to read it aloud because, like I said, my 5-year-old really liked it and now wants to save a dog from the pound. We're videoing that, at least for now. Yeah, it was a really good read aloud. I'd highly recommend it for kids and adults. Then I listened to Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this is obviously one that went around BookTube like forever ago. I've actually heard that her recent books are good as well. But I had never read it. I don't read a ton of sci-fi. I didn't know exactly what this was about other than a lot of people were talking about it. I thought that it was more sci-fi than it is. It is kind of like dystopian after like basically a pandemic that kills like 97% of the population or something. Yeah, it was kind of interesting to read it because I didn't know anything about it going in. I actually, for some reason, maybe because of Station 11, that's like a space thing, and so I actually thought that it took place in space. So I went into it with like really weird expectations, but I did end up enjoying it. I ended up rating it 4 stars. It took me a little bit to actually get into it. When I first started reading it, I was like, I'm not sure this is going to be my kind of book, just because the writing style. And then there were a lot of characters to follow, and I did end up really liking most of the characters that we were following. But then the ending just felt a little bit anticlimactic to me as well, where I was like it literally, I was listening and I was cleaning at the same time, and the audiobook finished and I was like, oh, like that's the end? It ended? And so, yeah, it was just, you know, it wasn't like a bad ending, just kind of not really my kind of ending. And it definitely isn't like my kind of book just in general, but it like wasn't bad. I did like the way that it was character driven more. And so it was kind of, it explored some interesting ideas, especially with the recent pandemic. I recently like read quite a few books that had to do with like pandemics and illnesses and stuff most of them without realizing it, which is just funny with the current COVID stuff going on. So. And then I listened to The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, and I rated this 5 stars, and I loved this. Last month I read Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and he is a lawyer for people on death row, and he actually talks about Anthony Ray Hinton a little bit in his memoir. And this is a memoir by Anthony Ray Hinton, who was on death row for forever, for a very long time, I think 20 plus years, and was wrongly convicted, was innocent, found innocent later. The book portrays his fight to keep his hope and his humanity alive as he went through this really hard and unjust situation, and had to, you know, be in jail for that long on death row, and, you know, hear other people and smell other people being killed, and just different things like that, and just the fight that he had, not only to prove his innocence, but the real story I felt like was his fight to keep his optimism and his faith alive. And he talks about God in it, and just being able to see the way that he was able to help other people even though his circumstances were so hard was so inspiring to me. And hearing his portrayal of kind of what he went through with the people who put him where he was at, and the guards and things, and the way that he was able to change his heart towards them and see them in such a Christ-like way and forgive them was also so inspiring to me. I absolutely loved the book and I would highly recommend it to everyone. And then I read a comic book, The Ultimate Spider-Man, and I actually really loved it. This is probably my favorite comic book that I've ever read. I haven't read a ton, but I've always loved Spider-Man, and of the Spider-Man comics that I've read, I enjoyed this one the most. I thought that it was interesting, a little bit different from like the typical. I really liked the art style. I loved Aunt May in this one. And I'm actually really excited to continue on in the series. I want to get the next one and read it next. My Agatha Christie book for the month was 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, and this was also one of my absolute favorite Agatha Christie books that I've read so far. Not because of the mystery. The mystery was a little bit convoluted, but not bad. I didn't guess it, but it was a little bit, I guess, complicated. Sometimes her best mysteries are the ones that aren't complicated, but you still don't know who did it. And this one was a little bit more complicated, but I really loved, at the very beginning they have Poirot visit a dentist, because that's kind of what the plot revolves around. And it was just so funny to me. I loved that part of it. And then throughout the entire book, Agatha Christie explores the theme of, is it worth it to sacrifice the individual for the betterment of the entire country, and kind of explores that theme, and even the final like wrap up of the case delves into that more. And I thought that that was a really interesting thing. A lot of her books are not quite so deep, and I thought that the theme was explored in a very interesting way. My Jane Austen book for the month was Persuasion by Jane Austen. This was a reread for me, but it has been a long time since I read Persuasion, and I am not as familiar with it as most of Jane Austen's other books. I basically know the backstory really well, and I've actually read quite a few retellings. I've watched the movie. I don't know if it's because I'm not as familiar with it, but outside of the romance, which I do really love, I do like the romance in Persuasion, but outside of the romance, the characters and the plot, like the side characters and the rest of the plot, just aren't as interesting to me as some of her other books. That said, I still gave it 5 stars. It's still a Jane Austen book, and I still really enjoyed reading it. I'm really glad that I reread it and became more familiar with it, and I will probably reread it in the future. And I'm really interested to watch the movie now that I have read the book twice, because I read the book when I was a newlywed like 7 years ago, and then I read it now. But before that, I had watched the movie with my mom in high school, and I remember getting to the end of the movie and being like, oh, they're in love with each other, and I hadn't realized that. So I'm really interested to watch the movie now that I've read the book and I'm more familiar with the story and the love story and the characters and stuff. And then I listened to Stolen Magic by Gail Carson Levine, and this is the sequel to A Tale of Two Castles. While I think the duology has good things about it, and I enjoyed both of the books for the most part, it's not my favorite by Gail Carson Levine, and I did like the first one more than this second one, although I think part of that may have been the narrator. For whatever reason, I just didn't like the narrator very much for the audiobook, and I think it detracted from the experience for me. There's also a lot of like titles and stuff in this duology. There's a dragon, and they always call the dragon it, capital IT, and some different things, and some of that was just kind of not as clear, or like it was harder to follow in the audiobook, where the first book I just read the hard copy of it, and so I think that if I had read the hard copy I might have liked this one more. And they were like both mysteries, and I liked that aspect of it, and I do like the main character, and I liked the new like kind of sidekick that we get in this one, but I don't really like how it's kind of like cheesy, almost like silly, and it is more middle grade, and it's not my absolute favorite by Gail Carson Levine. I rated it 3 stars. I think I rated A Tale of Two Castles 4 stars. And then I listened to A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab, and this is the second book in the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy, which I am reading through. I really enjoyed the first book. I liked this book as well. I rated it 4 stars. I liked the first one more, but I do tend to like second books in a trilogy the least, and so it definitely made sense to me that I didn't like this one as much, and I'm expecting to like the third one more than I liked the second. And then I actually also listened to Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Postone, and this is a Once Upon a Con series. The first one is Geekerella, and this is obviously a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And even though there's like tons of Beauty and the Beast retellings out there, I haven't actually read a lot of them. This one was absolutely perfect because it had a lot of bookish references, just about loving books and libraries and stuff. And the Beast, I actually really liked him, and it was easy to empathize and understand him, but he also had a good character arc. And there was some deeper stuff in here about like grief and working through that. So on top of like the romance, there was some deeper stuff that we got, and some really good friendships and stuff. And I really liked her dad and everything in it. It had like a good way of resolving the Beast keeping her in the castle trope, you know, that can be kind of problematic. It wasn't problematic at all in this one, and I really liked it, and I thought that it was really enjoyable, and I rated it 5 stars. And then I reread Creating Character Arcs by K.M. Weiland, and I rated this 4 stars. I actually rated it 3 stars the first time I read it, but I think it was the first book I read after Save the Cat, and so I just loved Save the Cat Writes a Novel the first time I read it, and so this one fell kind of short for me, but I actually think that this is a really good one to read along with Save the Cat. Like, I think it's a really good one because it talks explicitly about how character arc and plot are kind of twined together. It does use some different terminology for the different plot beats than Save the Cat, and that can be confusing, and there's stuff in it that I still feel like I don't fully understand because I think I'd have to maybe study it more. But for the most part, I really like it. It goes over both positive, negative, and flat character arcs and breaks them all down and gives a lot of really good examples and is really interesting to read. Then I listened to Talk Like Ted by Carmine Gallo, and this is one that I wanted to read for a long time. It's been on my list since before BookTube, I think. But it was actually a little bit disappointing. I rated it 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It was kind of interesting to read. And it's not that I didn't get anything out of it, but it left me feeling kind of like he didn't actually say a whole lot. My question at the end of the book was, why would I read this book instead of just watching some TED Talks and analyzing them myself? Because he didn't really tell me anything that I didn't feel like I couldn't watch a TED Talk and just know. So yeah, it was just like, I wouldn't not recommend it, but I wouldn't highly recommend it either. It's just kind of like a meh book for me, that it's interesting if you're interested in TED Talks. Then you might find it interesting, or if you're looking to improve your public speaking and you don't know anything about it, it could have some useful stuff in it. If you know a lot about public speaking already, then I doubt there's going to be anything in here that's going to be helpful to you. Then I read 27 Ways to Mend a Broken Heart by Sherry L. Tapscott, and I rated this 4 stars. It was the sequel to 27 Ways to Find a Boyfriend, and it was a light, cheesy, friends to lovers romance. It was an adult rom-com, and it's clean, and I really enjoyed it. And it had some of the characters in it, like some of the side characters, were in 27 Ways to Find a Boyfriend, so it was kind of fun to have those connections in there. I did really like the main character. I basically rated it 4 stars because it was kind of nothing special, kind of forgettable. But it was still fun. I enjoyed it all the way through, and it's one that I would highly recommend, especially if you enjoy clean rom-coms. Then I listened to A Life Once Dreamed by Rachel Fordham, and I rated this 5 stars, and this is a Christian romance set kind of on the frontier. It actually reminded me of When Calls the Heart, which I haven't watched all of, but my mother-in-law loves When Calls the Heart, and I have seen some of it, just in the way that like she goes off and she's a teacher on the frontier and has a romance, you know. I really loved the other side plots in it too, dealing with things like babies born out of wedlock, which was a really big deal back then. I also really, really loved the side character Sam, and if you've read it or read the book, then you know Sam. I actually heard that she's writing another novel that's going to follow Sam that's coming out next year maybe, and so I'm really excited for that because I would totally read that book because Sam was my favorite character, and I almost, even though I knew she wouldn't, I obviously knew who she was going to end up with because it makes it really obvious, but I almost wanted her to end up with Sam instead because he's just such a sweetheart, and I really just loved every time we got to see his perspective. And then I reread No Drama Discipline by Tina, I'm going to read the names because there's two of them, Tina Bryson and Daniel J. Siegel. And I rated it 5 stars, and I rated it 5 stars the first time I read it as well. And I want to turn around and just reread it again because it's so good. Having read and reread a lot of parenting books, this one might be my favorite now. It is principle-based, science-based. It is just full of grace for parents, just understanding that we can't be perfect parents, but also full of tools that will help you to become better slowly as you just try to be better. And it really motivated me to be more empathetic with my kids as they need correcting or as we're struggling. And I've had some really good moments, especially with my oldest, since reading the book that I think I wouldn't have had if I hadn't listened to this book and tried to implement some of the principles that they teach. And that's part of why I want to reread it again, is just because then I can get more out of it and be remotivated and stuff. And if you're looking for a more gentle parenting approach book, but that isn't extreme, then this is a really good one. They are very pro finding what works best for the individual child and parent, and finding what works best for the individual situation, but also good at giving you ideas for like big picture. This is what's going to help your kids in the long term. Here's how you can think about discipline to help yourself to be a more loving and kind parent, but still help your children learn how to behave correctly kind of approach. And then I read Princess of Shadows by A.G. Marshall, and I rated this 5 stars. This is a fantasy Princess and the Pea retelling, and I was curious right from the start because I haven't actually ever read a Princess and the Pea retelling, I don't think, but this one was really good. I loved the two characters, I loved the romance, I loved the magic in it, and just the connections to the original fairy tale, and I thought it was pretty unique. And the writing was really fun to read. It was a really quick book to get through once I started it. And then the last book that I read on my list of 16 books was, because of Winn, Dixie, we finished reading that aloud to my kids actually on the very last day of the month, and so that was fun. And just to finish off the video, my favorite books from the month were The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Postone, and Princess of Shadows by A.G. Marshall. I would love to hear in the comments below what your favorite books were, or favorite book was, from the month of May, and how your reading month went. And so drop that in the comments below and we can chat more about books and stuff. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe for lots of reading and writing content. And if you want to follow my reading journey more closely, you can follow me on Goodreads. I do share a review of every book I read on there, and I also share my favorite books plus stuff about what I'm writing on Instagram, and I'll link both of those down in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you in the next one.